Chapter 1: The U.S. Prison Boom and the Growth of Immigrant Detention. The nation of immigrants incarcerates more immigrants than anywhere else in the world. Major milestones dot the history of the contemporary immigrant detention system in the United States. In 1980, when detaining immigrants was a rare practice, the arrival of Cuban and Haitian refugees by boat during the Cold War led to the birth of the modern system with the opening of the Chrome Detention Center in South Florida. Later, during the height of the war on drugs, mandatory detention became law, stripping certain immigrants of due process rights. In 1996, the passage of two draconian immigration bills under President Bill Clinton expanded the grounds for deportation and doubled the existing detention capacity. But it was 9/11 that made immigrants an unequivocal target of the government in the name of protecting the quote-unquote homeland, after which billions of dollars were funneled into the deportation machinery. In recent memory, Trump's wholesale attack on immigration led to a considerable expansion of the system, reaching a peak of 500,000 people detained in 2019. But beneath these common points of departure lies another aspect of immigrant detention's history: the rise in mass incarceration. In 1970, the United States incarcerated less than 200,000 people. 3 decades later, that number had risen to over 2 million. The prison boom that took place over the last half-century is central to the story of immigrant detention in the United States. Critical resistance defines the prison industrial complex, PIC, as, quote, the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems, end quote. As the PIC was fortified through various developments, including increased funding for law enforcement, harsher sentencing laws at the state and federal levels, and the promise of jobs and revenue derived from a growing prison economy, the response to unnaturalized immigrants living in the United States and those arriving at our borders increasingly took on a carceral logic. Since the 1980s, a combination of economic restructuring and increasing tough-on-crime policies have produced devastating results: the highest rates of incarceration in the world and the greatest number of deportations in U.S. history. In my experience organizing against immigrant detention, there is a tendency among advocates and politicians to acknowledge the problems with the system without questioning how the United States came to have the world's largest detention infrastructure. Many will boil it down to a simple product of racism and xenophobia. Others will focus on the profit motives. While these factors are certainly salient, what is often missing is a more critical perspective on the role of the U.S. government in the PIC. In recent years, the Trump administration's promotion of white supremacy has generated interest in examining the roots of criminalization and deportation. Yet, in this process of discovery, there is a risk of taking the wrong lessons from history. Certain narratives give the impression that nothing has changed, which can fuel passivity and make us feel like there's little we can do to make things better. But in reality, mass incarceration and mass immigrant detention are recent developments, and learning about their expansion over time helps us better understand how these systems might be undone. In this chapter, I track the growth of the modern immigrant detention system through key moments in U.S. history. I start in the 1960s when a backlash against local social movements and civil rights gains triggered an acute and misguided focus on the problem of crime. This development coincided with a watershed in immigration policy, where the racist national origins quota system was terminated. The United States opened its door to some immigrants, but simultaneously limited migration from Mexico for the first time. This pattern of extending rights and opportunities to certain immigrants while tightening restrictions on others continued for more than 2 decades. The idea behind it was an old one: to support the quote-unquote good immigrants while keeping the quote-unquote bad ones out. In the 1980s, the combined circumstance of prison overcrowding and the arrival of Cold War-era refugees precipitated the initial transition of Immigration and Naturalization Services, INS, into a mass jail operator. This turn of events set the stage for the normalization of detention during the following decade when, amid the culture wars and influence of the new right, immigrants became a central target in the war on crime. The rise of neoliberalism remade immigration as well as economies in the United States and around the world. Meanwhile, the prison industrial complex grew to levels never seen before. It was in this context that the attacks on September 11th, 2001 took place, creating the political will for expanding the detention and deportation machinery and restructuring it into the system we have today.